Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour in the 16th year of Changi, the leap sixth month, and the, 22nd day by the heavenly calendar. Did I say 22nd yesterday? I have a feeling I did. But anyway, today really is the 22nd day. Yeah, sorry. These dates still get me. All right. Anyway, yeah, today is definitely the 22nd day in the leap sixth month by the heavenly calendar. We have just one more week in this leap month, and then we'll be getting into the seventh month. And of course, a week from tomorrow will be the Chirichur, the 7-1 festival. And the king will be celebrating this. Normally, he celebrates the 7-8 festival, but this year, due to scheduling situations, he's celebrating the 7-1 festival. And that will be held a week from tomorrow, because that will be the first day of the seventh month, a week from tomorrow. Okay. Tim Miller sitting in for the second king of Gyeonggi-mun, and let's go take our tour around the kingdom right now. In Chongpyeong, Tennessee, 68 degrees and clear, getting up to 87 today, partly sunny and humid with a stray thunderstorm tonight. A thunderstorm in spots this evening, otherwise mostly cloudy and humid, 66 for a low. And then in father's hometown of Cheongju, North Pyongyang province in Korea, currently 82 and partly cloudy and humid tonight. Heavy showers late, low of 72. Tomorrow morning rain, otherwise cloudy and very humid, high of 81. At the Tunigung Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania, currently 68 and sunny. Humid today with plenty of sunshine, high of 86. Tonight clear to partly cloudy and, yes, you got it, humid, low of 65. And at the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, currently 76 degrees and mostly clear. High today of 97, mostly sunny and very warm. Thunderstorms in spots this afternoon. Tonight, clear and humid, a low of 74. At the Suncheon Palace in Korea, it is currently 82 and clear. Tonight, mainly clear and humid, low of 74. Tomorrow, mostly sunny, hot and humid, and high of 96 tomorrow. And then at the Gunma Palaces in Japan, currently heavy rain is falling, and they're going to go down to 87 degrees, by the way, right now, 87 in heavy rain, and getting down to 74 tonight, a passing shower or two this evening, otherwise clearly partly cloudy. And then tomorrow, high of 89, mostly cloudy and humid. I have a heavy thunderstorm around in the afternoon. And then in Ilan, Taiwan, currently 86, and overcast, and tonight getting out to 76, and evening shower in places, otherwise partly cloudy. Tomorrow, 91 for a high, mostly cloudy, a thunderstorm in spots of the area in the morning, followed by a little rain in the afternoon. Okay, praise God. Okay, then let's go to Father's Word and see. Here. Okay. Today is the 80th anniversary of August 15th, 1945, when Father started his public ministry. Of course, August 15th, the Japanese emperor put out a broadcast at noon on August 15th, declaring that Japan was surrendering. The official formal surrender document was not signed for another almost 3 weeks, I think, aboard the USS, over the U.S. Missouri, and in Tokyo Bay later on, the General MacArthur and everyone like that. But but I think most people in Japan and Korea, China, Philippines, even India, regard this as the end of World War II. That this is the day that the end of the war in the Pacific. In other words, the end of the war against Japan. And so, as soon as the emperor put out that statement, Father began his public ministry. So, there are some people who say, well, look, 80 years, that means that there have been two 40-year courses. There must be a new 40-year course beginning. Well, I don't know. this thing about all these numbers and stuff like that, I think, in my opinion, my personal opinion, this is something that we have to leave up to Father. I think if if we were to ask him, uh, I'm 99.999% sure that he was, yeah, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I think I think when it comes to numbers, leave it up to Father. But it has been two sets of 40 until now. That is true. But whether we are now beginning a third set of 40, well, I suppose we are. But then we'll have to look back in 40 years. Those of you who are still here, I doubt very much that I will be here. But who knows? Who knows? Who knows? But look back in 40 years and see whether or not there was, in fact, a sort of a meaning to this whole 40, 40, 40 situation. All right, so let's look at Father's Word today. I tried to just sort of do a search on on um, um, on the. I just tried to do a search on the Chansungyong to see if there was anything special that Father said about August 15th, but I can't find anything right off the bat. So anyway, we will then look at what he is giving us here, and he's giving us. I just knocked my camera offline. Let's try to get it back. There we go. Okay. And a book on the root of the universe, Ujue Kunbon. Kunbon. All right, let's see here. Okay, so we're in chapter 2, section 3. Chapter 2, section 3. About a page or so before page and a half, I suppose, before we get to 2.2, but this is 2.1. So if you ask what kind of, well, Pun, and English, we have to translate this as person, which causes confusion because person, of course, has theological meaning and so forth, but don't get hung up on that, all right? I'm going to go ahead and translate it as person. Don't get hung up on that. If you ask what kind of person God is, Eve is in the internal and spiritual aspect, God's wife. God goes into Adam and goes into Eve and makes love. The dual characteristics are projected out, and then they become one, centering on love. It is only love that can bring together everything. That is how the relationship between God and human beings works. God is the internal me. Not referring to himself, but referring to each of us, every human being. Okay, all right. Praise God for that lesson that he's given us this morning. Okay. All right, so yes. So today, of course, the big thing that we're looking at is the upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska at the Elmsdorf military base, the U.S. military base just outside of Anchorage, Alaska. And it's going to begin in about 8 hours. In about 8 hours from now, leave, right? I have that here. It's going to start at 11 a.m. Anchorage time, and right now it is 3 a.m. Just after 3 a.m. So it's just short of 8 hours from now that this whole thing is going to begin. So let's pray for President Trump and his people who are there for their wisdom, but also pray for President Putin and his people that they can um, instinctively understand God's will and uh, that they will that they will follow God's will, that they will follow God's will, they will do what God's will needs them to do. They have original minds, they have consciences. How well educated those consciences are is an issue, but they do have original minds, and God is able to reach out to them through those original minds. Let's hope that he can influence, that he will be in that conference for sure, and that he will be able to influence the proceedings and the outcome. Let's hope that the outcome will be something that is pleasing to him. Let's look at some of these stories that people are writing leading up to this situation. A lot of stories, of course, are being written. Um, Trump Putin summit, Russia hawks debate those hopeful for peace. Retired Air Force Brigadier General Blaine Holt and former Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore went head toe-to-toe on Newsmax over desired outcomes from Friday's summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Okay, so that looks interesting. Let's take a look at this. Retired Air Force, okay. While Holt made the case that anything should be on the table to end the Russia-Ukraine war, Gilmore said Trump cannot legitimize what Putin has done in Ukraine. Now, now this is the kind of this thing that Gilmore is saying. This is the kind of thing that I find diplomats and politicians often saying, "Oh, we must not legitimize we must not reward somebody for bad behavior and stuff like this." But listen, right now, I agree with President Trump that we got to stop the killing. We got to stop the killing. Okay. And frankly, the United States has legitimized a lot of stuff that was bad, right? They've or at least they've acknowledged, right? They've all but acknowledged, maybe not officially, but all but acknowledged the fact that North Korea now is a nuclear possessing nation. The United States did its best. I don't know if best is the right word, but tried to stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapons, but for various reasons that effort failed, and North Korea now has nuclear weapons. Now, I think fundamentally we need to realize that President Trump is cleaning up a mess created by his predecessors. Biden, of course, but not just Biden. There was also Obama, there was also Clinton, and I think every president that has been in the White House since the fall of the USSR in 1991 owes or bears some responsibility for the mess that we are facing right now, where we have a war that never should have happened, and did not need to happen if people had just been focused on the right things, right? Russia kept saying, "Hey, listen, you guys keep it. NATO is expanding eastward, and if you guys keep doing that, there is going to be a problem," right? And they said this not just once, not just twice, but many, many times. And also the time that Putin talked to Clinton and said, "Hey, what would happen if Russia were to join NATO?" Right? And Clinton did not immediately turn that down, but he said, "Okay, I'll get back to you." And then the next day he came back and said, "No, no, that's never going to happen." So what that told Putin, I think, and I think that would be the case if I were Putin. Well, that plus the fact that Russia was originally brought into the group of 8, right? Right now it's the group of 7: U.S., Canada, Japan, and then UK, France, Germany, and Italy. Group of 7, and then that was expanded to the G8 to include Russia for about 1 or 2 years, I think. And then the globalists put their foot down, and Russia got excluded. So, and the idea that you know that someone has to agree with you in order for you to talk with them, I think is not a constructive thing, not a constructive thing at all. So there has been this effort to isolate Russia um, for a long time, and of course, previously, they were trying to isolate the USSR, and there were good reasons for that. And the USSR was isolated, but there have not been those kinds of good reasons for isolating Russia, though, have they? And I'm not legitimizing anything that Putin has done or what Russia has done in terms of taking over Crimea, the Donbass, and Kherson, and uh, that place that begins with a Z, whose name I cannot pronounce, the one with the um, nuclear plant. But listen, um, right now, right now, we just need to say that okay, listen, the killing has to stop. The killing has to stop, and um, we need to freeze things right now and work things out diplomatically over the next years or maybe even decades. Um, and I think that's probably what I expect is going to happen. Boy, I hope that that is going to, or something like that is going to happen. I keep talking about the situation on the Korean Peninsula, and nothing was ever legitimized there. We didn't legitimize what the Chinese did or what the North Koreans did, but basically it came to a point where they said, okay, listen, wherever the front line is right now, that's the line. Okay, that's the military demarcation line, and let's sign a armistice, and that may be a good model. They're not going to listen to what I tell them, of course. My idea was for them to meet on the Diomedes Island. They're not going to listen to me, but something like that. The killing has to stop. The killing has to stop, and I think that is what President Trump is focused on, and that's why I really think that he's a great person for that. Um, in a spirited exchange on Finnerty, Gilmore, the former U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, warned that Putin's ultimate goal is to secure American recognition of his territorial conquest in Ukraine. A move Gilmore says would have disastrous consequences. My hope is that when President Trump is here tomorrow, that he will understand exactly what Putin is trying to do. What Putin is trying to do is to get the American stamp of legitimacy on his conquest, on his violence, on his atrocities, Gilmore told host Rob Finnerty. If he gets it, I believe we're on a long-term path to a major war up the road. Gilmore argued that without such legitimacy, Russia's hold on any occupied territory will eventually crumble, whether in 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years. He urged Trump to reject any territorial concessions and to levy sanctions instead. Well, President Trump has already said, and he said this not once, but several times, that he's not going to negotiate away Ukrainian territory. This is something that the Ukrainian president has to take care of. So I don't know why Gilmore keeps harping on this. My counsel to him will be to walk away from any unreasonable demands that Putin is making and put those sanctions on, Gilmore said. Holt strongly disagreed, saying the war has devolved into a bloody stalemate with mounting casualties and an urgent need for dialogue. We're north of 1 million dead in a war of attrition. So how many have to die before we escalate ourselves into some sort of nuclear escalation with Ukraine as the flashpoint of this, Holt asked. And that is an excellent point. That is an excellent point. Someone sort of figured out that if Russia keeps on gaining territory at its current rate, it will conquer all of Ukraine in about 70 years. And think of all the people, the millions of people who would have to die in that kind of a situation, and perhaps not just Ukrainians, right? So I think after more than 3 years now, 3.5 years, I think both sides are prepared for some kind of peace. At least I hope that is the case. And Gilmore may be correct that Putin would like to have legitimacy, the stamp of legitimacy on his territorial gains from the United States. That may be true. Holt said Russia has failed to achieve its original objective of fully conquering Ukraine struggling to make limited territorial gains. Russia has already proven with its army over the last 3 years that it's not in danger of taking over anything, he said. But he warned that Ukraine's fighting forces are severely depleted, with battalions down 30% and soldiers ranging from 16 to 60 years old. The poor, valiant Ukrainian soldiers, they're buckling because they don't have enough men to fight. They have 60-year-olds on the line. They have 16-year-olds that have never held a gun before, Holt said. And so we don't want to talk this out. So we don't want to talk this out. You know, the Europeans keep saying, oh, you know, we just have to send them more weapons. But I think Holt is right that it's not just a matter of weapons. It's about human beings there. Okay, I guess that's it. Okay, let's see into the story. So, we'll see what Putin puts forward tomorrow, or in less than 8 hours from now. He meets with President Trump. Putin delegation lands in Alaska for summit. And by the way, interesting thing. Here, this is Alexei Lavrov, the foreign minister, and he's one of 5 people who have come with Putin to the Alaska summit. And he's wearing a T-shirt that across the T-shirt, you can't quite see it in this photo, but apparently it says USSR. USSR. So when he's packing his T-shirt, he puts that in, and his wife says, "Oh, come on. What is his name? Sergey, you got to be kidding. You're not going to take that to Alaska." He could have worn a shirt that said, "Make Alaska Russian again." He could have done that. I don't know. But USSR? All right. I guess they're going to come out swinging. Oh, my goodness. These people. This is an interesting story here. Let's talk about the potential silver lining here. No one is expecting a sudden end to the war in Ukraine from this summit. The presence of Vladimir Putin on U.S. soil, a leader indicted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, is a blow to other Western nations' efforts to keep him isolated as a global pariah. And again, you know, so we don't like him, so we're not going to talk to him. We're going to make him a pariah. Do you think that's going to make him change? No, of course not. You know? So this thing that people have about, oh, economic sanctions, oh, pariah, oh, you know, don't legitimize him. All this kind of stuff is counterproductive and pretty hypocritical, if you ask me. All right. And so I applaud President Trump for ignoring all that nonsense and bringing Putin to American soil. Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, told me this week that Putin will try to appeal to Trump's ego with flattery and holding out the prospect of a big deal. But if further down the line that big deal can include renewed limitations on nuclear weapons, then that at least will be a silver lining. Russia, China, and the US have already embarked on a dangerous and hugely expensive strategic arms race. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, which limited ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges of 300 or 500 to 5,500 kilometers, has collapsed altogether this year. Well, it already collapsed. You know, and President Trump actually withdrew the United States from this treaty during his first term because he said there were just too many violations of it by Russia. And then recently, just in the last 3 weeks, Russia said they're no longer going to be held to this treaty. So that's what McMaster says about it collapsing altogether. But I mean, you have a treaty with just one country signing it. That's not a real treaty. The New START treaty, and START stood for Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, I think, which caps the number of nuclear warheads the US and Russia can deploy at 1,550 each, expires in February. Putin has signaled he is interested in renewing talks on limited nuclear weapons, limiting nuclear weapons. While this should not be an excuse for dodging a ceasefire in Ukraine, it could eventually make the world a slightly safer place. Okay, so maybe this can come out of this. That's Frank Gardner, uh, the security correspondent for BBC. Right. Okay. And we're expecting to see Trump leave the White House and head for the talks in Alaska shortly. The official schedule says he was supposed to set off at 6:45 Eastern Daylight Time, but we're yet to see him leave. That was about what? About 6:45. It's 7:25 now, so almost 45 minutes ago. We don't know if he will speak to the press, but we'll be watching closely and bring you updates. Okay, so that's their live minute-to-minute reporting there. Right. Let's no, what's Breitbart doing today? Okay, no. Okay, no. Yeah, today we're not so interested in the domestic politics of the U.S. We're interested in this situation in Anchorage right now. Okay. All right, let's see here if there's anything else we can hit on this. Okay, let's go to some of these headlines on Google. Fox, Trump to hold historic summit with Putin in Alaska, seeking an end to Russia-Ukraine war. And Al Jazeera, they got to write something. Why did Russia sell Alaska to the United States? Gotta write something. Okay. Pro-Ukraine rally draws hundreds of Alaskans ahead of Trump-Putin meeting. Let's look at the full coverage here. Russian media is buzzing over Trump-Putin talks. The mood in Kiev is very different. Yeah, I'm sure it is, but they've done their best to protect their country, and Ukraine is going to be a kind of a sacrificial lamb. They are already a sacrificial lamb. But listen, don't blame Trump. Blame Biden. Blame Obama. Blame Clinton. Blame the Bushes and so forth. Every president since 1991, and Ukraine is sort of caught in the middle here. But if this goes on, then there's very possibly a nuclear war in our future, and Ukraine will have an even worse situation. So I think there is a time when you just have to limit your losses and say, okay, that's it. We got to pick up our chips and go home. And I think that's what Ukraine needs to consider right now. Okay, here. Articles and commentaries splashed across Russian state news sites, reveled in the global attention and platform garnered by Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin's talks with the U.S. President Donald Trump. Russian state media has run many positive takes on what the high-stakes summit centered on ending the war in Ukraine could mean for Russia. The mood in Kiev was meanwhile dour, reflecting fears that Trump won't push Putin. Okay. Russian media outlets were in high spirits on Friday as Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin headed to meet U.S. President Donald Trump for an Alaskan summit, widely presented as a win for Moscow, its economy, and global standing. Articles and commentary were splashed across Russian state news sites on Friday, reveling in the global attention that Putin's historic trip to the U.S. was garnering, with positive takes on what the high-stake talks centered on ending the war in Ukraine could mean for Russia, which has been isolated and economically punished by the West since invading Ukraine in 2022. Russia-U.S. summit will be an attempt to reset relations, state news outlet TASS headlined, with accompanying stories echoing positive sentiment around the one-to-one talks. The whole world is waiting for the meeting between Putin and Trump, and Russia and the U.S. have potential to renew partnership in the Arctic, commentators stated, according to Google translations. Aha. So that's what Putin is going to talk about, partnership in the Arctic. Mhm. Okay. The mood in Ukraine was positively dour, meanwhile, with news outlets reflecting fears that Kiev could be sold out during the talks with Putin. A veteran statesman was seen as likely to pursue as many concessions as he can from Trump in return for a ceasefire. So maybe looks like the Russian media is expecting Putin to offer partnership in the Arctic as a kind of a carrot for President Trump. So, so if you look kind of to put it in an extreme, if you look the other way for, for Ukraine, then we can have this. And this was kind of similar to the Taft-Katsura agreement between the United States and Japan in the early 20th century. I've forgotten the date. Basically, that was a situation where U.S. and Japan agreed to sort of look the other way from each other's colonial exploits. That Japan agreed, they didn't keep this agreement, but at that point they agreed not to bother what the United States was doing in the Philippines, its colony of the Philippines. Meanwhile, the United States would look the other way on what Japan was doing on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast China. Yeah, that didn't work out very well, did it? In many ways. But that kind of a quid pro quo type of situation looks like this is what the Russian media is speculating may happen in Anchorage. State news outlet RIA Novosti reveled in the absence of Ukrainian and European officials from what it described as historic talks. Well, it is historic. We're going to be talking about this for many, many years. At least 50 years, we'll be looking back at this either in a good way or a bad way. It depends on what happens. RIA Novosti's columnist Kirill Strelnikov said recent Russian territorial gains in Ukraine showed the country's forces were already negotiating long before Friday's talks, noting the main negotiator who silently and tiredly laid out the killer arguments on the table was the Russian army. Of course, that's propaganda. Okay, let them have their propaganda. Russia's media landscape is heavily controlled by the state, with little pushback against the Kremlin's messaging and policies. Throughout the war, state-run media have aggrandized Russian wins on the battlefield while downplaying or ignoring news to the contrary. And yeah, in wartime, that's what you do. Commentaries, unless you're the United States, yeah, the United States likes to shoot itself in the feet when it comes to wars. The media likes to be another front that has to be fought by the military. Commentary seen to denigrate or damage Russia's war effort can land authors in jail. In Ukraine, news outlets are decrying what they and the Kiev leadership see as the rehabilitation of Putin. From war criminal to U.S. guest, Trump invites Putin out of isolation. The front page of the Kiev Independence online news site. And again, yeah, that's certainly, we could understand that that's how the Ukrainians are going to look at it. The International Criminal Court in 2023, which the United States is not a signatory, does not recognize its jurisdiction, issued an arrest warrant for Putin over alleged war crimes, namely the unlawful deportation of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to Russia. The Kremlin denies any wrongdoing. The U.S. is not a signatory to the Rome Statute that established the ICC, and therefore has no obligation to arrest Putin when he steps on American soil. Another Kiev Independent story reflected low morale among Ukrainian troops who feared Trump could capitulate to Putin by offering up Russian-occupied territory as part of a coveted ceasefire deal, after previously boasting he could end the war in Ukraine shortly into his second mandate. Securing this peace has proved far harder than Trump expected, however. He has so far refused to pull the trigger on further sanctions on Moscow, despite threatening to do so if the Kremlin did not agree to a ceasefire. The lead story on the Kiev Post headlined, Trump holds enormous leverage over Putin. Will he use it? reflected concerns that while Trump holds some cards that could persuade Russia to enter a peace deal, he ultimately won't be prepared to act. So why aren't people talking about China? I mean, China is the shadow partner in this situation, and President Trump needs to um, basically he needs to threaten China with sanctions. That's where the real pressure will come from. That's where Putin's real weakness is. I hope someone in Washington realizes this. They must, I'm sure. Right? Okay. Let's see if there are any. Uh, Let me look for a story that talks about. Let's see here. Anchorage, China. Let's do a search on those. Um, okay. In Anchorage, China. Okay, well, I don't want China daily. What time is Donald Trump meeting Vladimir Putin? Was 3 hours ago. Doesn't look very promising. No, no one's talking about China. Basically, China's role, in other words, because that's the real uh, pressure point here. You know, put sanctions on China, and I think this war will end in 24 hours. And pressure on China means threat. You don't even have to do it; just threaten to deny Chinese banks access to the dollar system, and boom, voila, you got yourself a ceasefire. In my opinion, maybe there's a reason nobody's talking about it, but I don't know why. Okay. If anything is going High stakes, Trump writes ahead of departure. US President Donald Trump has just posted on Truth Social platform high stakes. That means he's all he's psyched up. That's as he gets ready to leave Washington for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. We're watching the scene live on the tarmac. You too can by pressing watch live at the top of the page. Okay, well, that would be, it's not the White House, obviously, but that would be the base in Maryland. Okay, and he'll leave the White House alone by helicopter, I suppose. This is what he usually does. Let's see, Epic Times, even Epic Times is not talking about China. Hmm. 5 things to know ahead of Trump's meeting with Putin. Well, I'm disappointed. I would hope that someone would take a look at that situation. Uh, let's um, let's ask a question here. Maybe can China influence Putin to end the Ukraine war? Let's ask that question. Here we go. Now, for China can help Trump and Putin end the war in Ukraine. Foreign Policy Magazine. Oh, 1 day ago. All right. Well, they're good. Someone's talking about it. Let's take a look. Foreign Policy. Man, I don't know if they'll let us, but 7-party talks in Beijing. More talks. Leading to a UN-backed peacekeeping force could help secure peace. And this is by the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. Well, yeah, okay. I was not hoping to find one by a communist Chinese author. Yeah, okay. What is it? Who is this guy? Uh, Founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization. So where is this Center for China and Globalization? Is this, uh, it's so this is not what I had in mind, obviously. China is uniquely positioned to help break the gridlock. No, this is so this is China trying to sort of worm their way into this situation so that they can become part of the success of the ceasefire and then say, hey, look, uh, you need to include us in the sort of a, world governance structure because look how good we are. Look how much we contributed to the ceasefire in Ukraine. So this is yeah okay. So this is this is CCP uh, worming it so trying to worm itself into this. So if someone has a if someone has a feast, right? You always have to watch out for people walking in off the street and helping themselves to the food, and that's what China is trying to do here. China is uniquely positioned to help break the gridlock. That one sentence tells you everything you need to know about this guy and his article. We're here. Hello. We're ready to help. Okay, well, just for entertainment, let's look a little bit more. Beijing can convene a follow-on summit bringing together Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and Europe, leading to a face-to-face meeting among the leaders of all these players. The goal would be to create a formal seven-party talks framework consisting of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Ukraine, and representatives from the European Union. Okay, that's it. I can't take it anymore. I can't stand it. Oh boy, boy, that was a bad thing. That was, I regret asking that question. Ridiculous, ridiculous. Oh my goodness, I gotta go take a shower or something, maybe wash my mouth out. CCP. No, no. My idea is that President Trump threatens to take China out of the dollar system. All right, isolate China or threaten to isolate China, and then Xi Jinping will make a phone call to Putin, and Putin will capitulate. That's my idea of how to involve China in this situation. Obviously, not what the CCP has in mind. Okay, all right. Okay, let's see here. All right. Okay, let's see if they have anything. Yeah, like I said, I'm not very much not interested in domestic uh, politics. So here we go. Let's look at this one. Okay. Putin compliments energetic Trump. Oops. Okay, here we go again. Let's see what. Okay, let me just change my. Where am I right now? Okay. Well, usually it works if I go to Canada. Go to Canada. Just change my view. Okay, connected to Vancouver now. And voila. Okay, good. Yeah, they'll show anything to Canadians. Okay. Putin compliments energetic Trump administration ahead of Friday's Alaska summit, meaning President Trump is older than me. I think that's what the message that he's trying to send. President Vladimir Putin told senior Kremlin officials that the Trump administration is energetic and sincere in an apparently calculated message to Washington the day before he is due to meet Trump in Alaska. But if you say, hey, they're really energetic, that means they're older than us, and yet look how much they're working. Wow, yeah. And well, you would expect that people their age would be more tired, but no, they're really working. So it's a kind of a backhanded compliment, I think. I don't know if Putin realizes that. Trump and Putin have both spoken out to express their expectations ahead of Friday's planned in-person talks. The first time the two leaders will have met since 2019, and the first time Putin will have set foot on American soil in a decade. The bilateral meeting will take place. Okay, we know that. Kremlin said opening a meeting of senior Kremlin officials on Thursday to discuss upcoming summit. Russian state media reported that President Putin was complimentary towards the Trump administration and upbeat on talks. The current U.S. administration, which, as everyone knows, in my opinion, is making rather energetic and sincere efforts in order to halt combat, to end the crisis, and reach an agreement that is in the interests of all parties involved. President Putin said the purpose of the meeting was to create lasting conditions for peace, both between our countries and in Europe, and for the world in general. So, yeah, it looks like Putin's going to try and expand the talks, not just about Ukraine, but maybe about the Arctic, maybe about was it McMaster? Well, anyway, one of them was saying, or no, this BBC security correspondent, maybe include the INF, maybe include the New START treaty. So maybe expand the talks, not so it's not just about Ukraine. It looks like that's what's going to happen. On the finer details, Kremlin functionary Yuri Ushakov said on Thursday that preparations for the talks have entered their final phase, noting because they were announced at such short notice, everything is being done at pace. Difficulties being overcome included visas for the Russian delegation to land on U.S. territory in Alaska. What kind of visas? Just tell them to show their passports, and that should be enough. President Trump also spoke out on Thursday, telling Fox News Radio that his primary ambition was to speak on behalf of the soldiers of both sides of the conflict who are being killed unnecessarily, and to persuade Putin to sit down with Ukraine's President Zelensky as soon as possible. The President hinted a second trilateral meeting in the U.S. Ukraine Russia format could happen so quickly after Friday's talks. It may not be even worth himself and Putin flying home, as Zelensky could fly directly to them. We have a lot of planes, Trump explained. Trump said on Thursday that he feels that once he's gone into the meeting and met Putin, he'll know whether the talks will be productive in the first couple of minutes, but expressed that the fact Putin is coming to Alaska at all suggests he wants to get it done. I'm convinced that he's going to make a deal, Trump said. So it's becoming clear to me that there is of course, in any negotiation, right, there's a difference in expectations. But I'm seeing a gap between Trump and Putin, and I think you're also seeing that. President Trump is focused on Ukraine, and as he said, focused on ending the killing. Soldiers are dying unnecessarily. Civilians are dying unnecessarily. Whereas Putin is saying, hey, as long as we're here, right, let's talk about the Arctic. Let's talk about the INF. Let's talk about New START treaty. Let's talk about, nuclear denuclearization or arms reduction, reducing the nuclear arms, right? Sort of trying to expand the talks, and then Ukraine can be a part of that, but sort of a bigger deal, like the BBC security correspondent was saying. I think maybe that was a very astute point that he was making. So the question then will be, and I assume President Trump and his people are aware of this. So then, how are they going to respond? Are they going to insist on focusing and zeroing in on Ukraine and say, listen, we can talk about all those things, but first, let's talk about this thing we got going in Ukraine, right? You want to talk about the Arctic? You want to talk about INF? You want to talk about START? Yeah, we could do that. But first, let's do this thing with Ukraine. And even then, I don't know if bringing arms reduction into this is going to be beneficial for the United States, because it may set up a situation where the U.S. feels that it has to give concessions on the arms reduction question in order to win Putin's concessions on Ukraine, which would be a bad idea in my opinion, because the arms reduction is something that's going to affect U.S. national security for decades. but we need to do this thing with Ukraine. And remember, the purpose for the United States is, remember what the ball, that we need to keep our eye on the ball, the eye on the ball. And the ball is what? The ball is the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. That is the ball that we need to keep our eye on. And the reason that the United States is trying to get out of the Ukraine war, in my opinion, is so that it can focus itself on China, on North Korea, on the South China Sea, on the East China Sea, and on the Pacific, where Western Pacific, South Pacific, and Western Pacific, where China is increasingly influential. And now, so that's the real situation for President Trump. We got to get this Ukrainian thing off of our plate. And I understand that people in Ukraine are apprehensive. And as I've said before, I really hate to say this, but at least for the time being, meaning the next 5-10 years, Ukraine may have to live with a situation that they are not happy with. Okay, because America needs to get Ukraine off of our plate. And there is a bigger picture that needs to be dealt with here. We need to be focused on China. And I'm terribly sorry for the people in Ukraine, but just that's the situation right now. But don't blame Trump. Obama, Biden, Clinton, Bush, all those people who brought us to this situation. Both Bushes, I think, right? Both Bushes. My green screen keeps turning around here. I've got fans on both sides because it is rather warm, and my wife and I are trying to save on electricity costs. I've got a fan here and a fan here. That's sort of blowing my green screen in the back. All right, so and probably it's going to be a situation where Zelensky is not going to want to join the talks because he's going to realize that Trump is not on his side, that Trump is not going to be supporting his position. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. And the Europeans too. The Europeans may be very angry about what comes out of this meeting. And they may make noises like, "Oh, okay, well, we will carry on without America. We will carry on." But the reality is that they cannot. They cannot. So I guess our message to Europe would be, well, if you cannot provide a different solution, then why are you talking? Why are you moving your mouth? If America is the only one that can, if it's up to America to provide a solution, then just sit back and let us do what we need to do, what we think is the best thing to do. Always keeping in mind that not for Europe, but for America, the focus has to be the Chinese Communist Party. It would be for the Europeans too, but I don't think they realize that. Certainly, van der Leyen doesn't realize that. Stuart Karmer doesn't realize that. Merz doesn't realize that. Macron, absolutely not. Absolutely does not realize that. All right. So anyway, coming up on just maybe about 7 hours or so now, and things will see here. All right, the White House has released the names of the officials due to travel with President Trump aboard Air Force One to Alaska. 16 are listed, including Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. and of course the press secretary and CIA director John Ratcliffe. It's interesting that Treasury and Lutnick are going along. I guess Treasury is going along in case they have to talk about sanctions. Lutnick, I'm not sure why he would be going along, but Putin only brought 5 people with him. Trump has left the White House. He left at around 7:31 local time. And it's coming up on 8 o'clock local time now, so less than half an hour ago. And here, what Zelensky has said about the Trump talk, Putin talks. Trump has suggested a further meeting could be arranged, including Zelensky, if today is good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that second meeting is going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. My guess. So anyway, he's now on his way to Air Force One. Trump's short post on social media a few minutes ago, high stakes, raises expectations and a sense of drama. The US president will land at Cold War era American Air Base in Anchorage, followed shortly afterwards by President Putin stepping foot on US soil. Why do they call it Cold War era? It was, of course, established during the Cold War, but Alaska needs to be defended. Of course, we have military bases in California. Are they Cold War era? Anyway, where is it? This is BBC. Yeah. Stepping foot on US soil beyond US UN meetings for the first time in 2 decades, Putin in a blow ends his isolation and re-enters the world stage as far as it is possible to get from Europe side by side with the American leader. Before any words are even exchanged with Trump, Kiev is seeing that this is a win for Moscow as it tries to avert the risk of Ukraine's future being decided without them. Again, people are treating this like a football game. All right. Oh, it's a win. Oh, we got points here. We got points there. No, let's come on. What I'm always reminded of is that very few Pulitzer Prizes are awarded to people who cover peace. Journalists like war. They prefer war over peace because that's where the prizes are won. And so, this guy, Tom Bateman, right, BBC correspondent for the State Department, is writing in the vein of, look who's winning. Putin has scored a point. This kind of situation. It's not about points. It's about stopping the killing. Stopping the killing. Let's award points based on stopping the killing, shall we? Yeah. Well, and then after this, they'll say, "Oh, BBC will say, oh, okay, President Trump. Okay, yes, he stopped the war, but he gave Putin too many points." That kind of a ridiculous situation. Okay, Trump boards Air Force One. Okay, so he's walks up the stairs to board Air Force One right now, and he turns around and waves to the crowd before walking onto the plane. He doesn't make any comment as he leaves. And so as we end today's King's Report, we have President Trump walking into Air Force One, and then I guess Air Force One closing its door and revving up its engines and taxiing out onto the runway. I'm guessing. I'm guessing. All we know is that he's now in Air Force One, along with 16 other people. All right, so let's pray that now, 7 hours from now, the meetings are scheduled to start. Let's pray that they will go well in terms of God's will. Okay, whatever that may be, that they will. We can speculate on what God's will may be, but that's always maybe a kind of a counterproductive thing to do. But uh, God knows what he wants from this meeting, and let's hope that what God wants can be accomplished. Or that, put another way, that whatever, because both Trump and Putin have their 5%, that they can accomplish that 5%, and that something will come out of this meeting that God can work with. All right, to accomplish his will and bring about his kingdom. God bless Godspeed. And this is a shout out to President Trump. God bless President Trump. Godspeed President Trump. And may God's kingdom come quickly.